essential to American conceptions of nature. Sort of, if you look at a lot of this kind of stuff, the idea of sort of this sort of almost imperceptible like horizon, almost out of view, or the idea of sort of endless expansive wilderness that was essential to the idea of manifest destiny and sort of white colonization of North America. Definitely ideologically rooted and related to notions of the aesthetic and the sublime coming from writers like Kant and Edmund Burke. As a result, the paintings are usually overwhelmingly large, and if they contain figures at all, the figures are rather small. Often these paintings were sort of presented as you would sort of go to a movie screening or a premiere. So like Frederick Church would make like a huge ass painting and there would be like a curtain on top of it, and then everybody would be like, oh, Frederick Church just made this painting, and then they would like unveil it and people would come and just like stand in front of it for like hours, like looking at the little details. So they're really big. If they do have figures, they're really small. If they're depicting, well, there's different modes of sort of the Hudson River School, one being more pastoral and one being more about the wilderness, and the ones that are sort of more pastoral never have non-white figures in them, and usually the non-white figures, mostly American Indians, are in the sort of more like wilderness-oriented paintings. And so this sort of relates to the idea of this sort of diminishing sense of like the self, and I would call it the white self, in the face of or confronted with nature, basically. But this area of the Hudson Valley, through the Hudson River School, was one of the first places sort of depicted as Edenic within the sort of wilderness ideal of America. And so, considering that Cole visited the falls in 1825, if we just look at images of work from the Hudson River School, before then, we can see sort of how sort of quickly this shifted in such a short period of time. Yeah, this is a painting by John Vanderlyn in 1804, The Death of Jane McRae. Sort of gives a pretty good indication of how American colonists felt about the Hudson Valley region as sort of an area of like hostile nature populated by equally hostile Indians. The other representations of Tattersall is also popularly known as the setting of Washington Irving's Rip Van Winkle, which is a story about a Dutch settler who falls asleep by the waterfall and wakes up many years later to find that everything has changed. Mostly, the story sort of mostly reveals anxieties about like change in this area with Dutch settlers, et cetera, et cetera. So now I'm going to focus on the sort of this picture that Cole did, this painting. It's on the picture. It's kind of a big picture. To talk about sort of this relationship that starts to emerge between the actual waterfall and sort of paintings, depictions of it. Cole's visit sort of coincided with the development of the tourist economy in the area. When he visited, there had already been sort of like railings and platforms installed for visitors, but he obviously removed sort of all signs of human presence in like construction. When he painted it, he first visited, took sketches, and then made the painting later, like not at the site. As a result, the painting sort of, there's lots of changes, there's lots of sort of manipulations that he did to sort of make it transcend any sense of time, like the sort of lush fall foliage of this painting is sort of combined with this like rushing, full-flowing waterfall doesn't make sense because the waterfall only flows that way in the springtime. So he sort of made this like his composite like of like different like temporal like states of the waterfall. Also, if you look really closely, I don't know if you can see it, but right there is a little Indian crossing the waterfall. Interestingly enough, the area was known obviously before from European exploration, but was not actually inhabited by any indigenous peoples due to its resistance to sort of agricultural cultivation and its high elevation, so nobody actually could live there. But Cole painted an Indian crossing the fall, and I guess in my opinion, sort of like reaffirming the idea of the Indian, I mean for me, in here sort of becomes part of the flora and fauna of the landscape, or not just of the landscape, but of the American Indian, of the American wilderness. The Indian is effectively included as a natural object upon which the viewer can aesthetically contemplate along with the waterfall, trees, and rocks. And so the Indian emerges as sort of as ahistorical as Cole's ahistorical construction of the landscape. I actually went to Tatterskill, and it would have been impossible to do. So along with this sort of tourist economy that starts to develop, local hotel, Laurel House, bought the rights, and this is around the same time, like between 1825, bought the rights to dam Spring Creek, which is a creek that sort of runs through or out of the fall, and would charge a fee to tourists when visiting. They dammed it because they wanted to produce this hyperbolize this like springtime effect that happens with the fall in terms of damming in order to make sure that it flows more freely. And so this is sort of the beginning of actual physical changes in the landscape, to sort of make it more like enticing to tourists. There seems to be intent to construct the actual landscape and the representation of it with precision. Notions of nature dictated how those representations and actual physical changes would occur to produce a naturalized landscape and image and experience. So in terms of how people were, this is when people started thinking about how you were supposed to experience nature, and so all these like physical things, like the actual physical space started to change. The work of art, like Thomas Pole's work, shaped those actual spaces as well. There was considerable debate regarding the platform that had been built to facilitate the viewing of the falls. There had been like this wooden like platform, and it was seen as in like a rural style, and the rural style, which I would say would be pastoral, was inappropriate to the sort of wild, the wilderness aesthetic of the falls. Calvert, an urban architect, wanted to use rough stone cut in an irregular way to replace the platform. And so there's like all these little things about how to sort of shape the space to make it appear more natural. Also, along with the tourist economy, developers started building little cottages in lieu of sort of large urban-styled hotels. This was sort of in line with urban conceptions of what nature should look like and how it was to be experienced outside of the city. Debates over the framing of the falls, including rhetoric that the falls did not hold up to the effect that they were supposed to have on visitors. Which is interesting because people started coming and looking at this place, and what they were expecting was not the waterfall. What they were expecting was Thomas Cole's painting. And so that was the experience they wanted to have when they visited it. And so this in combination with the fact that Cole's painting wasn't actually really based off of the falls, but it was sort of a composite image of it, but was sort of based off of the sublime, like aestheticized abstraction of the falls, began to actually change the physical space, and thus, I guess, a mimetic relationship develops between the actual site and its representation. The art world sort of constructed this idea of the white cube as something it could critique, and yet has never been able to actually let go of. And so for me, the curatorial has always been applied to natural landscapes, as you can see in terms of like the actual physical construction of Tatterskill Falls. And so when discussing the physical transformations that have happened there, especially in light of the fact that many of those transformations happen as a direct result of the waterfall's relationship to like artistic depictions of it, I think we can become more like fully conscious of the falls as part of a more like art historical genealogy and not so much a historical like geology. This space is and has been since the early 19th century, in fact, highly like curatorial. I mean, if we want to talk about the racial aspects of it, have to do with how we either absent people from landscapes or put them in, but not as people.